Welcome to Old People Stories. Today we will tell you about the Dalai Lama. So please subscribe our channel. Let's go to start the video. The story of the Dalai Lama begins far from the noise of modern cities and politics. It begins in a quiet corner of northeastern Tibet, in a small village surrounded by open skies, cold winds, and the steady rhythm of life in the mountains. In the year 1935, a child was born in a simple home made from mud and stone. No one in the village imagined that this child would one day become one of the most influential spiritual leaders in the world. His birth name was Lama Tondub. He came from a family of farmers, ordinary people who worked the land, tended animals, and lived by the seasons. His childhood was simple. He played outside with other children, chased animals across the fields, and lived a life untouched by the greater struggles of the world. But the elders would later say that even as a small child, he had a calmness in his eyes, a quiet depth, something unusual for someone so young. Tibet at that time was a land of monasteries, long traditions, deep spirituality, and a unique system of leadership. The Dalai Lama, the spiritual head of Tibet, had passed away in 1933. According to Tibetan belief, the Dalai Lama reincarnates, returning to the world again and again to continue his work of compassion. Monks traveled across the region searching for signs, dreams, and clues that would lead them to the child who carried the spirit of the Dalai Lama. When the search party reached the village where Lama Tondub lived, they saw signs they could not ignore. The child recognized objects belonging to the previous Dalai Lama. He spoke with surprising confidence for his age, and there was an energy around him that the monks could not explain. They believed they had found the reincarnation they were seeking. At the age of 2, the boy was declared the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet. His life changed forever. He was taken from his village to the capital city of Lhasa. There he entered the vast and sacred Potala Palace, a place filled with prayer halls, ancient manuscripts, and spiritual tradition dating back centuries. It was a world far different from the quiet countryside he once knew. But even as a young child, he adapted with a remarkable calmness. He began a life of study, meditation, and discipline. Scholars and masters taught him philosophy, ethics, history, language, and the teachings of Buddhism. Day after day, year after year, he was trained to become not only a spiritual guide, but also a leader who understood responsibility, compassion, and wisdom. As he grew older, Tibet was entering a difficult period. The modern world was changing quickly, and political tensions were rising. China was increasing its influence and control over the Tibetan region. The young Dalai Lama, still a teenager, found himself caught between the ancient traditions of his people and the harsh realities of geopolitics. At the age of 15, while most young people are still learning about the world, he was forced to become the political leader of Tibet. The weight on his shoulders was enormous. He became responsible for the hopes of his people, their safety, their culture, and their future. But even with all this pressure, he remained calm. Those who met him at that time often said that he carried a gentleness, a peaceful energy, even in the middle of fear and uncertainty. He tried everything he could to protect Tibet through peaceful negotiation. He believed deeply in dialogue, compassion, and understanding. But the situation worsened. The tension between Tibet and China reached its breaking point. And in 1959, when the conflict became too dangerous, when his life and the lives of his people were in immediate danger, the Dalai Lama made one of the most painful decisions of his life. He fled Tibet. Disguised as a soldier, traveling at night, crossing mountains and rivers, he made a dangerous journey into India. It was a journey no one could forget. A spiritual leader escaping with nothing but hope and determination. A man leaving behind the land of his ancestors, unsure if he would ever return. When he reached India, he was exhausted, heartbroken, and grieving the loss of his homeland. India welcomed him with compassion. He began his life in exile, carrying the pain of Tibet on his shoulders. But instead of giving in to despair, he transformed his suffering into a mission of peace for the entire world. This was the beginning of a new chapter in his life, not as the ruler of a land, but as a global symbol of compassion, wisdom, and nonviolence. And the world began to listen.
When the Dalai Lama arrived in India after his dangerous escape, he was not only a man without a country, he was the spiritual heart of a people scattered and wounded. Tens of thousands of Tibetans had also fled, carrying only what they could hold in their hands. Many had lost family members, homes, or entire communities. They looked to him for guidance, hope, and strength. The Indian government offered him refuge in a small hill town called Dharamshala. It was quiet, surrounded by forests and mist-covered mountains. What began as a temporary shelter slowly became the new home of the Tibetan people in exile. Monasteries were rebuilt, schools were started, a new Tibetan community began to rise from the pain of displacement. But rebuilding an entire culture away from its homeland was not easy. Everything had to be started from the ground up: religious institutions, education systems, cultural preservation centers. The Dalai Lama worked tirelessly, meeting with teachers, monks, families, and officials, making sure that Tibetan identity would survive, no matter how far they were from Tibet. Even though he had lost everything, his palace, his government, his land, he never showed bitterness. Instead, he continued to speak about compassion, forgiveness, and peace. People who met him during those early years in exile often said they were surprised by his humor, kindness, and ability to remain hopeful despite the weight he carried. But while he focused on rebuilding his community, the world was beginning to take notice. The Dalai Lama's message was simple yet powerful. He spoke about the importance of kindness, the responsibility humans have toward one another, and the need for peace in a world full of anger and conflict. His gentle voice began reaching people far beyond the Tibetan diaspora. Universities invited him to speak about ethics and philosophy. Leaders sought his advice on conflict and compassion. Ordinary people who had never heard of Tibet before began to feel inspired by his teachings about inner peace and universal responsibility. Slowly, the Dalai Lama became more than a spiritual guide. He became a global moral voice. His message traveled across continents. He taught that real peace begins inside the human heart, that compassion is not a religious idea, but a human necessity, that forgiveness is not weakness, but a path toward true strength. His words resonated with people from all cultures, all religions, all walks of life. In 1989, His lifelong commitment to nonviolence was recognized when he received the Nobel Peace Prize. The world honored him not for political power, but for moral courage. The award symbolized the growing impact of his message, a message rooted in the belief that peace cannot be achieved through anger, fear, or violence, but through understanding and compassion. By this time, he was traveling constantly, meeting presidents, scholars, children, priests, and refugees. Everywhere he went, people were drawn to his presence. He had a way of making each person feel seen, heard, and understood. His laughter was infectious. His humility disarmed even the most powerful figures. But behind his warm smile was a man who still carried deep sorrow. He missed Tibet. He missed the mountains, the monasteries, the people he grew up with. He missed the land that shaped his identity. Yet he carried this pain privately, choosing instead to speak about hope and possibilities. Over the years, he became a symbol not only of Tibetan resilience, but of human resilience. His life in exile showed that even when everything is taken away, a person can still rise with dignity, wisdom, and compassion. This period of transformation, from a young leader of a threatened nation to a global advocate for peace, marked one of the most significant chapters in his life. But his journey was far from over.
As the decades passed, the Dalai Lama's role expanded far beyond what anyone could have imagined when he first arrived in India as a frightened young leader in exile. He transformed from a symbol of Tibetan struggle into one of the most respected spiritual figures of the modern world. But at the heart of this growing influence was something simple. He never stopped being a teacher. Wherever he traveled, whether it was a small classroom or a massive auditorium, he spoke with the same warmth and clarity. He explained ancient Buddhist ideas in ways anyone could understand. Meditation, compassion, kindness, forgiveness. He brought these concepts into the lives of millions who had never before encountered the teachings of Tibet. People were struck not just by his wisdom, but how human he was. He joked freely. He laughed loudly. He admitted his own mistakes. He reminded others that he was only a simple monk, even though he carried the weight of an entire nation. In a world increasingly shaped by technology, conflict, and rapid change, his message felt timeless. He spoke about the importance of emotional health long before the world began talking about it. He urged people to develop warm-heartedness, to care for others, and to build inner peace through discipline and reflection. His focus was always universal. He often said that compassion is not tied to any religion. It is part of human nature. Whether someone believed in Buddhism or no religion at all, he believed they could still live a life guided by kindness. His teachings began influencing fields far beyond spirituality. Scientists studied his approaches to meditation. Psychologists used his ideas to better understand the human mind. Educators incorporated his messages into programs for children. Activists drew inspiration from his commitment to nonviolence. In many countries, he became a beloved figure. People waited in long lines just to hear him speak for a single hour. Some said that his presence alone brought them peace. Others said that he helped them through grief, illness, or personal struggle. But while he traveled the world, he never lost sight of his Tibetan people. He continued to advocate for them, not through anger or violence, but through dialogue, patience, and diplomacy. His goal was not independence through conflict, but autonomy through cooperation. He wanted Tibetans to have the freedom to preserve their culture, practice their traditions, and live without fear. Through his peaceful approach,
He became an emblem of dignity in the face of injustice. Even though he could not return to Tibet, he never allowed bitterness to root. Instead, he encouraged Tibetans to remain hopeful, strong, and united. Meanwhile, his home in Dharamshala became a global center for learning and cultural preservation. Tens of thousands visited every year, seeking wisdom, healing, or simply the chance to be in the presence of a man whose voice had guided the world toward hope. During these years, he wrote dozens of books, each one exploring different aspects of human life: happiness, compassion, suffering, responsibility, and spirituality. His writings reached millions, offering guidance to those searching for meaning in an increasingly complex world. He also became a powerful advocate for something he felt was often forgotten: the environment. Growing up in the Himalayan landscape had taught him the deep connection between nature and human well-being. He spoke passionately about the need to protect the planet, calling it our shared home, and urging humanity to act with urgency and unity. Despite his global fame, he maintained a simple daily routine. He woke up early to meditate. He studied. He prayed. He met visitors and gave teachings. And every evening, he reflected on the day not as a leader, but as a monk seeking to grow in compassion and understanding. As he entered his later years, many wondered if age would slow him down, but his energy remained remarkable. Even into his 80s and 90s, he continued traveling, teaching, smiling, and laughing. His presence brought comfort to people facing wars, disasters, and personal hardship. He became a living reminder that wisdom is not measured by power, but by peace. That leadership is not about control, but about compassion. That strength is not shown through force, but through forgiveness. This chapter of his life, as a global teacher of compassion, became one of his greatest gifts to humanity. And yet, his journey had even more to teach the world. As the Dalai Lama's influence spread across continents, the world began to see him not only as a spiritual teacher, but as a living symbol of peace, a guide for humanity in an age when conflict and division seemed to grow stronger each year. Leaders invited him to speak at parliaments, universities, and international conferences. He shared the same simple message everywhere he went. Humanity cannot survive without compassion. Peace begins with understanding. Real change starts within each person. And remarkably, people listened. In countries wounded by war, he reminded citizens that forgiveness was possible. In nations divided by political hatred, he urged people to see each other not as enemies, but as human beings. In places overwhelmed by poverty and grief, he spoke softly about hope and resilience. His words resonated deeply because they were not theoretical. They came from his own life: exile, loss, and the constant challenge of leading a displaced people. He never demanded sympathy. Instead, he turned his suffering into a lesson for others. When he spoke at the United Nations, he emphasized compassion as a global responsibility. He reminded the world that humanity is one family, bound together by shared hopes and shared struggles. He asked powerful nations to lead with kindness, not fear. He urged smaller nations to hold on to dignity and unity. His presence brought a calmness that few world figures could match. Even those who did not share his beliefs respected his sincerity, humility, and courage. Across the world, youth began to follow him. They saw in him a wisdom that felt genuine
and refreshingly human. He encouraged them to develop emotional strength, to take care of their mental well-being, and to seek harmony rather than competition. In an era overwhelmed with stress, anxiety, and misinformation, his teachings felt like a light in the darkness. But even as he inspired millions abroad, he continued to carry the responsibility of his own people on his shoulders. Tibetan communities in India, Nepal, Bhutan, and the West looked to him for unity and hope. They struggled with the pain of displacement, the fear of cultural loss, and the uncertainty of their future. And yet the Dalai Lama encouraged them not to lose heart. He urged them to preserve their language, their rituals, their stories, and their spiritual traditions. Every year, he met with young Tibetans, guiding them to strengthen their identity while also embracing the modern world. He told them to study science, technology, and global culture, not as replacements for their heritage, but as tools for a better future.
During these years, a remarkable transformation began. The Dalai Lama became a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern knowledge. He engaged deeply with scientists, exploring the nature of consciousness, the science of happiness, the workings of the mind, and the role of compassion in human survival. He believed that spirituality and science were not enemies, but partners seeking truth from different directions. These conversations influenced everything from psychology to neuroscience. Researchers discovered measurable benefits of compassion and meditation, ideas that had existed in Tibetan culture for centuries, but were now gaining global recognition. Through dialogues, conferences, and books, the Dalai Lama helped reshape modern understanding of emotional health. He emphasized that controlling the mind was not about religion, but about training, discipline, and self-awareness. People across the world, regardless of their beliefs, began practicing mindfulness and compassion meditation inspired by his teachings. Despite his growing global presence, he remained grounded. He still lived in a simple residence. He still prayed each morning before sunrise. He still met people from all walks of life, rich and poor, powerful and ordinary, with the same gentle smile. But as he entered his 80s, the world began to worry. What would happen after him? With compassion, he reminded everyone that he was only one person. He encouraged people not to depend on him, but to cultivate their own wisdom and kindness. He said repeatedly that the real legacy of any leader is not their name, but the lives they inspire. During this time, he also made an important decision. He voluntarily stepped back from political leadership, transferring responsibility to elected representatives of the Tibetan people. It was a rare act in global history, a leader giving up authority, not because he had to, but because he believed democracy was the future. This step inspired millions. It showed the world a different kind of leadership based not on power, but on humility. Even as he grew older, his influence did not fade. In fact, it grew stronger. His voice continued to shape discussions about peace, justice, human rights, and environmental protection. He became a global elder, a respected guide whose wisdom transcended borders, religions, and generations. His life stood as proof that even one person, armed with compassion, could move the world. But the next chapter of his journey, one of reflection, legacy, and the final wisdom of an aging teacher, would reveal even deeper lessons.
As the Dalai Lama entered the later years of his life, something remarkable happened. Instead of slowing down, instead of retreating from public life, he seemed to embrace this chapter with even greater clarity and purpose. Age did not weaken his voice, it deepened it. His message became softer, yet stronger, simpler, yet more profound. He often joked about getting older. He laughed about his knees hurting or about needing to walk more slowly. But behind the humor was a man who understood that age is not a decline. It is a refinement, a distillation of what truly matters. And what mattered most to him was compassion. He continued traveling, meeting leaders, teaching students, and speaking to crowds. Even when his health required caution, he insisted on spreading his message. He believed that as long as he could speak, he had a responsibility to remind the world of its shared humanity. During this period, he began reflecting more openly on his life. He spoke about his childhood in Tibet, his escape into exile, the rebuilding of his people, and his decades of global advocacy. But he always framed these memories not as personal achievements, but as lessons for others. He reminded people that real happiness does not come from wealth, fame, or status. It comes from serving others, from caring for one another, from cultivating a warm heart. He often said that compassion is not a luxury, it is a necessity for human survival. As he aged, the Dalai Lama also addressed a topic many avoided: death. But he spoke about it without fear. In his teachings, he explained that death is a natural part of life, and that preparing for it is an essential spiritual practice. He encouraged people to reflect on their lives, to let go of anger, and to face the end with peace. He said that when a person's life is guided by kindness, their final moments become gentle, like a candle quietly going out. Yet even as he spoke of mortality, he reassured his followers that compassion lives beyond any single person. Wisdom does not end when a teacher passes away. It continues through the hearts of those who carry it forward. Meanwhile, Tibetan communities across the world continued to preserve their culture. Young generations learned their language, their prayers, their stories. They saw the Dalai Lama not just as a leader, but as the spiritual grandfather who showed them the meaning of resilience and dignity. He also continued engaging with scientists, exploring the mysteries of consciousness and the human mind. These conversations produced new insights into how emotions shape our behavior, how meditation restructures the brain, and how compassion deepens human connection. His collaboration with science became one of the most unexpected and influential contributions of his life. As the world faced new challenges, climate change, political conflict, social division, the Dalai Lama urged humanity to confront these issues with unity. He said that in a globalized world, we cannot think only as nations or tribes. We must think as humans, sharing one planet, bound by one destiny. In his later teachings, he emphasized the importance of inner peace more than ever before. He explained that a calm mind is the foundation of a compassionate life. Without inner peace, no amount of wealth or success can bring happiness. But with inner peace, even the most difficult circumstances can be faced with courage. And yet, despite his global stature, he continued to live with the simplicity of a monk.
His day began with meditation before sunrise. He ate modest meals. He walked among his people with humility, waving to children, speaking kindly to elders, and smiling at everyone who came to see him. Even in his 90s, his laughter echoed through rooms. He joked with interviewers. He teased monks. He made light of his own seriousness. That laughter became the symbol of his spirit, gentle, loving, unbroken. The world looked at him and saw not just a leader, but a rare human being who embodied his teachings. A man who lived every day with compassion as his guiding force. A man who lost his homeland but never lost hope. A man who faced suffering but never turned to anger. A man who aged with grace, wisdom, and humility. As he reflected on his life, he said something that captured his entire journey. "My true religion is kindness." These words became his legacy, a message that will continue to inspire humanity long after he is gone. But his story does not end here, because the final chapter of his life, his teachings for future generations, his thoughts on the next Dalai Lama, and the lasting power of his message carries even greater meaning. As the Dalai Lama moved further into the twilight of his life, his thoughts often turned to the future. Not his own, but the world's. Not his legacy alone, but the generations who would inherit the challenges and opportunities of tomorrow. He spoke of the next Dalai Lama not with fear, but with hope. He emphasized that no one person is indispensable. Wisdom is not confined to a single life. It flows like a river, carried forward by those willing to act with courage, clarity, and compassion. He reminded people that the essence of leadership is service, and that true authority comes from humility, not power. In quiet moments, he reflected on what humanity truly needs to survive and thrive. He often said that kindness is the language everyone can understand, that empathy is the bridge between nations, and that inner peace is the seed from which all meaningful action grows. In these reflections, one could sense the urgency of his message. The world, he knew, was fragile, but also capable of great goodness. He spent his days teaching, but also listening, to children, to scientists, to those suffering from war or displacement. He reminded everyone that learning is a lifelong journey, and that wisdom is nurtured in conversation as much as in contemplation. And through it all, he never stopped emphasizing joy, not frivolous pleasure, but the deep, steady joy of a life lived in harmony with others. Even as he aged, the Dalai Lama embraced change. He acknowledged modern challenges, environmental crises, technological upheavals, social polarization. Yet he refused despair. Every human being, he said, has the potential to make a positive difference. Every action of compassion, no matter how small, ripples outward. He also urged people to honor the planet. He said, "Our environment is not separate from ourself. To harm it is to harm humanity. To care for it is to care for each other." His concern for the earth was not abstract. It was rooted in the same fundamental principle that had guided his life: interconnectedness. In his final years, the Dalai Lama's presence was quieter, yet no less powerful. He could be seen walking in the monastery gardens, pausing to smile at a flower, greeting visitors with gentle words, or simply sitting in meditation as sunlight filtered through the trees. Every gesture, every glance, every word carried the weight of decades of experience, the depth of suffering witnessed, and the boundless hope he maintained for the future. He often said that people ask him, "How should we live?" His answer was always simple: with a warm heart, with kindness, with mindfulness. Treat others as you would wish to be treated. These were not abstract ideals, they were practical instructions for navigating a complex, unpredictable world. Even as the question of succession arose, he reassured Tibetans and the world alike. The spirit of his teachings is eternal. It does not reside in a single individual. Compassion, courage, and wisdom are carried forward in every thoughtful action, every small act of generosity, every choice to forgive rather than condemn. And so the Dalai Lama's final chapter was not one of endings, but of continuity. A life devoted to service, reflection, and joy became a guidepost for humanity. In the eyes of those who met him, in the hearts of those who followed his teachings, his message endured. Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. The world will remember him not just as a spiritual leader, but as a luminous presence who showed that the path to peace begins within, that the power of kindness surpasses all borders, and that one life lived with courage and warmth can inspire generations. As the sun sets over the mountains of Tibet, over the cities and fields of the world, the Dalai Lama's legacy continues, quiet, profound, and eternal. His life is a reminder that in a world often defined by conflict and fear, compassion remains the most revolutionary act of all. The man has passed from this world, but his heart and the hearts he touched will never fade.